Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Do you want to be inspired by extraordinary courage and real life stories? Well, you've definitely come to the right place, and welcome everyone to a good place where truth and integrity meet, where I will be introducing you weekly to today's thought provoking and compelling premier whistleblowers, educators, authors, journalists, humanitarians, activists, and celebrities. And they all have one thing in common: they're people of truth and integrity. And again, I have one of those people today. So, with me, joining me today is Mr. Mike Stark. So he's an American reporter, blogger, political activist, attorney, computer programmer, and he graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law. His work often appears at starkreports.com, the Huffington Post, Daily Kos, and several other group blogs. He was a panelist in the 2006 and 2007 Yearly Kos conventions, but he has been arrested not once, but 3 times while attempting to do his reporting job, and we will be discussing that throughout the show. So, Mike, thank you to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, so I don't even know where to begin. I guess after speaking with you earlier, can we kind of go back a little bit into your history and background, how you first became interested in this topic and working in politics and working as a writer?
Sure. I think we can't tell this story without telling some of the background. But the anodyne, boring background is that I was on my way to medical school in 2002, 2003, when, the Iraq War got started. And I started paying attention to politics a lot more because it was a lot more accessible. All of a sudden, you had the internet and you could read the New York Times without going to a newsstand, or the Washington Post, or for that matter, the Denver Post, or the St. Petersburg Times, or the Milwaukee Journal. And at the same time, as Howard Dean's campaign ramped up, you started hearing about things like blogs and bloggers and Talking Points Memo and Atrios and the Daily Kos. And I started paying attention to those. And what they served as was a kind of news aggregator and curator. It brought you a lot of stuff that, even if you happened to pick up in the New York Times, I maybe did that once every 3 months when I was in college. You're going to find a lot of stories on the blogs on a daily basis that the New York Times would never cover, the Washington Post would never cover. So all of a sudden, there was this vast sea of information that you could just dive in and soak up and learn. And as a college student, I was all about that. And, it didn't take me too long to figure out that I was a pretty hardcore liberal Democrat. And I got behind Howard Dean's campaign and started doing some blogging of my own. And right around this time, I'm also a baseball fan. And at the time, I was a Yankee fan. No more, because they are the Republicans of baseball. And I've moved away from the New York market, so I got a new team. But, I was listening to a Yankee game one day, and the next time I turned on my radio while vacuuming the house or something, I heard this reasonable sounding voice, very appealing. It turned out to be Bill O'Reilly. I'd never heard of Bill O'Reilly before. I wasn't a big cable news fan. And his dulcet tones kind of drew you in, but it didn't take you long to realize that everything he was saying was just absolute BS. And I was kind of outraged. I mean, he's talking about the Iraq War and, supporting the Bush administration. And I'd spent 4 years in the Marines, and I know people die in wars. And, I had friends that went over to the first Iraq War. And, I was kind of outraged enough to actually pick up the phone and start calling this show. And the first time I called, I was, knees shaking. I couldn't believe I was on this national radio network talking to this guy, and my voice was going out to millions of people. But it soon became a kind of classic hobby. I don't think anyone's proud of listening to talk radio, even conservatives. If you ask them outside a conservative function if they get their news from talk radio, they're mostly in denial about it because it's got a kind of stigma to it, and it should, because it's all BS. But I listened to just kind of sharpen my arguments. They were the foil against what I was reading in the blogs and reading in the news. And, I knew stuff that they weren't telling their audience, and I knew when they were lying. And, at the time I didn't realize it, but I was about to become a lawyer. So, I think I've got this passion for, arguing or winning arguments. And became an enjoyable hobby. I'd call Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly, and I would drive them absolutely crazy on their shows. Eventually, I screwed up the courage to start posting under my own name at the Yearly Kos liberal blog, and I'd tell stories about my calls to talk radio. And before you knew it, Media Matters was picking up. I found really good reception. The diaries were received very well at Yearly Kos, and before you knew it, I had one of the top blogs on the left in America. It was probably top 5 or top 7 or something like that. You can't do that and study for medical school. So it came down to Howard Dean in politics or organic chemistry. And I chose Howard Dean in politics, and I switched my major to pre-law, ended up in law school, and moved to Virginia. I got to Virginia and landed smack dab in the middle of one of the highest stakes Senate races in America with George Allen. And your audience will probably recall George Allen was the senator that called a young tracker macaca, which was an ethnic slur. And the media picked up on it in terms of he's picking on this young college student out of a crowd for no reason, being very mean. But they never connected that, or they accepted George Allen's excuses that macaca meant things like it had to do with his mohawk haircut, or what he was trying to say is that he was a shithead, or he's went through 7 or 8 different explanations of what macaca means. But everybody knows macaca is it's a slur. It's a racial slur having to do with South Asian people. More prominent in Europe, where George Allen's mom was from. But nobody was really calling George Allen out on the fact that it was a racial slur until I went to one of his events. And considering he was running for senator in Virginia, there's one particular racial slur that has a lot of relevance in Virginia. And I asked him if he had ever used that word. And when he said, "What? No." I said, "Never in your life?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, can you explain the Confederate flag in the noose you kept in your office?" He said, "Son, I'll be right back with you." And his staff had me removed from the event. But I caught that on audio. I posted it to my blog. And before you knew it, the national media was searching up and down through Charlottesville, talking to all his former classmates at the University of Virginia and people that he knew at his law firm and all the rest. And stories just came out all over the place of him using the N-word all the time. I mean, he was just a racist. Why else would he have a Confederate flag in the noose in his office? So that launched what I do now. It's essentially a reporting gig where I go ask Republicans questions they don't want to be asked, that the rest of the media isn't asking. And, I've been doing that on and off since 2006. I spent some time working for Greenpeace, doing similar work, undercover work, going to coal conferences and stuff like that. But always trying to figure out what it is that the mainstream media should be asking, but isn't asking because they're too concerned about access or, for some other reason.
Okay. And so I understand, now I kind of understand the backstory on that. So what was your first real job where you actually got paid doing this type of work?
Sure. That was probably, I had taken gigs where folks had asked me to go out and ask, certain people running for campaigns, certain questions that they thought these folks were, susceptible to. But I think my first job was probably with a group affiliated with Greenpeace in 2013. Actually, no, my first job was with Fire Dog Lake in 2009, right after college, right after law school, I should say. I went up to the Hill and we were actually, in this case, our goal was to ensure that Democrats didn't pass any health care that didn't include a public option. So Jane Hampshire was the proprietor of Fire Dog Lake. She hired me to go just ask Democrats on the Hill, will you pledge not to vote for any bill that doesn't include a public option? We didn't have much success there, but, there were all these Republicans walking around that, she didn't have anything for me to do with. And, I didn't it's funny, you've got 434 congressmen. You don't know them all. So the first question I'd ask is, are you a Democrat or a Republican? And if they were a Republican, I'd just let them go. Well, at the time, in the swamps of the blogosphere on the right, there was a lot of talk about whether or not Barack Obama was born in the United States. That conversation hadn't migrated to the mainstream media yet. So I decided to start asking Republicans if they believed Barack Obama was born. And, the response was amazing. None of them did. None of them would go on the record as saying, yeah, I believe. Look, I'm overstating the case. Trent Franks did, and believe it or not, Mike Pence did. Two Republicans out of probably 50 that I asked unequivocally came out and said, yes, Barack Obama was born in the United States. That's not an issue we need to be contesting. All the other ones were like, well, I'd like to see the birth certificate. I don't understand why he's not showing his paperwork. They all had some kind of doubt. And all of a sudden, the birther story became a big story in the national media. So that was my first job in 2009. I took a break from that beginning in 2013 to take a fellowship with this Greenpeace affiliated group where I did additional investigative journalism. And then I went back to this in 2017. And that's where I think the story that we want to tell today begins. A little bit of background, though. Republicans have always had folks up on the Hill and at Democratic campaign events asking questions that Democrats would find out unwelcome. Now, to me, most of them are juvenile or dishonest or, they're straight from talk radio. And for the most part, Democrats do a pretty good job of handling themselves. But it is an annoyance. Democrats don't have anybody on the Hill putting Republicans on the spot the way Republicans have. They've got WorldNet Daily. They've got CNS News. They've got all these marginal Daily Caller, all these marginal quote unquote news outlets. Really, they're propaganda outlets funded by billionaire Republicans operating at a loss. They've got reporters from these places swarming the Hill, harassing Democrats. What ended up happening was we lost the election in 2016. And American Bridge is the largest Democratic opposition research firm in the United States, in the world. And they looked at how aggressive Republicans were and how timid or cautious or just risk averse that Democrats have traditionally been. And they said, we just lost this election that we never should have lost. And it's probably because we aren't taking enough risks. So they decided to launch their own imprint called American Ledger, which helps them project their opposition research. Sometimes you get a story and it's not fully developed and you pitch it to media and the Washington Post says, well, we're going to pass on this one. Well, if you develop a little bit by asking the principal a question about this vulnerability he has, maybe he hasn't paid taxes on his vacation home in 3 years. That's not a big enough story for the Washington Post to take up column space. But if you go ask him a question about it and he lies about it and he can demonstrate the lie, then all of a sudden the story gets a little bit bigger and, traditional reporters are a little bit more willing to look into that story. So that's essentially what I was hired to do, was take opposition research, ask the targets of that research about their vulnerability. And the reason I was hired to do this is because, this firm, American Bridge, decided we just needed to take more chances. We needed to, put a little bit more skin in the game. And I was that skin. So it started, I was hired at a subsidiary of American Bridge. It's an arm's length subsidiary, but it's called Share Blue. And it's a national media outlet. And I was hired to follow the Ed Gillespie campaign around, at all of his events and, just constantly ask him questions that he didn't want to answer. So the first thing I did was I went to one of his fundraisers, kind of incognito, investigative journalist style. And I caught his stump speech and I got to know who he was. And he and I made some small talk, how's the Senate race compared to the governor race, or the governor race compared to the Senate race that you just ran a couple of years ago? How's your fundraising going? Stuff like that. So he saw me. He knew who I was. That paid off because at the next event I attended, it was a town hall. And he took questions at the end of the town hall, of course. And when it came time to wrap up, he chose me to ask the last question. He obviously thought I was a supporter. My question to him was, walk me through the moral calculus that you used to become a tobacco lobbyist after the entire world knew that they were using cartoons to addict children. They lied about what they knew about, the cancerous agents in their product, and they actually manipulated their product to make it more addictive to people. How do you decide personally that it is okay to become a lobbyist for a company that does that? And, give him credit. He was silver-tongued and smooth and, answering the question. But from that point forward, every time they saw me, they had me removed from the event. So I was reduced to showing up at the event before it started, lurking in the parking lot, sneaking up on them, ambushing them, and asking them, after the Las Vegas shooting, why won't you release your NRA questionnaire and tell Virginians where you stand on guns? Or after he ran a series of MS-13 ads that cast all immigrants as essentially drug dealers, killers, and rapists, how he's going to represent, the immigrant communities of Virginia if that's what he thinks of them. Questions like that. And then I'd catch him again as he came out of the event with the ambush stuff. So the one time that the only time I'm able to actually stick with him is when he's at public events. And he ended up at a parade in October. And I was there to cover him. And I was going to walk up and down the parade route asking him questions about his MS-13 ads and his anti-immigrant stances, because it was in Annandale, the most diverse part of Virginia. And I thought it was shameless for him to even be showing up there, and I was going to hold him accountable. Unfortunately, he got to the police first. He told the police that there was this suspicious character lurking about his campaign bus. They had no idea who I was, but boy, did I look dangerous. So a policeman comes up to me and tells me to stay away from the bus. And I tell the policeman, well, you're going to have to arrest me because I'm a reporter. I'm here. And the policeman says, don't F with me. And now we're off to the races. I'm swearing at the policeman swearing at me. And before you know it, I'm tackled to the ground, beat up by 6 cops, sent to jail. That was the first time I went to jail in the last, about a year. In the space of about 12 months, I went to jail 3 times for reporting. And here it was because the Gillespie campaign set the table by telling police that I was a suspicious character. They had no idea who I was, and they wanted me gone. That's not American. That's not the way the press should be treated in America. There's video of this. If you Google Mike Stark, Fairfax arrest, you'll see the cops piling on me and beating me up. And all I wanted to do was ask this candidate questions. So that was the first time I was kind of sort of set up by these Republicans. The next chapter of the story begins in January of 2018. Now I'm hired by American Bridge to be a reporter for their new imprint, American Ledger. And I'm having some fantastic successes. After the Parkland incident, I asked Ron DeSantis, who was running for governor and unfortunately won his race. And I can't remember her name, the new senator from Tennessee. I keep wanting to say Michelle Bachmann, but it's not Michelle Bachmann. It's I can't remember what her name is right now. It escapes me. Anyway, I asked them, aside from thoughts and prayers, what are you going to do about these mass shootings in America? And the senator from Tennessee just looked at me and she said, this is a members only elevator. And Ron DeSantis, you'll have to Google the video. It was just extraordinary. It ended up being an extraordinary video. We put it up at Now This, and it ended up with more than 10 million views. Just went all over the place. And I had other videos like that too. And I was doing really well at American Bridge. The plan was working perfectly. We're finally starting to hold Republicans accountable for things they're doing or things that they should be doing that they're not doing. And the project's, just a huge success. They send me to CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, which is held here in the suburbs of DC every year. And there, I don't know if you remember James Damore or not. He's a guy that some people call a whistleblower at Google. And essentially, what he
I do
did
know
was
the name. Yeah, I have a
he,
focus on whistleblowers, so I'm fairly familiar
right.
with most of them, or
I'm
those who
not
claim
sure I
to
would
be.
call this guy a whistleblower. I
Yeah,
would
those
call
who
this
claim
guy
to
pretty
be.
brave for speaking. Right. He was pretty brave for speaking out the way he did. And, he's
Mhm.
got the, I don't doubt that his beliefs are sincere, but they're bigoted and they're sexist. And I don't blame Google for firing him. You can't write a memo to the entire company saying that women aren't good enough to be engineers. Their what do you call, their genetic makeup makes them inferior engineers. You can't write that kind of memo and not expect
Yeah, he was on a
to,
documentary too, and I watched that. He just said his life fell apart.
well, I'm not sure that one mistake should destroy anybody's life,
Mhm.
but you should be giving maybe a second chance, get some sensitivity training, or anyway, I'm not here to defend him because he was at this um, CPAC conference, and at the same time, Me Too had exploded, and Time's Up, and all the Harvey Weinstein stuff and all the rest. And I thought it would be very interesting to ask James Damore what he thought of the Me Too movement. So I tried to, and he had his handler there. Her name is Christy McNally Smith. She was the executive director of the Republican Party of Maine and Donald Trump's campaign chair in Maine. At the time, she was doing PR for a group called Free Our Internet, which was anti-net neutrality, and she was, escorting James Damore around, acting as his gatekeeper. So I asked for an interview, said I wanted to do a Me Too interview, and she gave me the name of another guy, Chad Wilkinson, who was a former spokesman for Breitbart, who was also working on the Free Our Internet campaign. I called him. He didn't return my call. So the next day when I saw James Damore, I decided, look, I'm a reporter. It's my job to ask these people questions, whether or not I have permission. This is America. We've got freedom of speech, freedom of the press. They don't have to answer my questions. They can ignore me all they want, but I'll be damned if I'm not going to take this opportunity to ask it. That's what my job is. So I asked him about Me Too, and he swats the camera out of my hand, and then he looks at me and he says, "Why did you just push her?" And I'm perplexed. What are you talking about? Yeah, you just pushed Christy. Why did you just push Christy? So the idea here is that when they learned that I was from American Bridge and I was there to hold Republicans accountable, they came up with it. The right loves Saul Alinsky, especially the part of Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, that says use their own weapons against them. Or, so I'm utterly convinced that they communicated on an email list of communications professionals and said, look, we've got this reporter who's been making waves over at American Bridge. He's now stalking CPAC here, trying to make Republicans look bad here, which is true. I mean, I'm not trying to make Republicans look bad. I'm trying to capture Republicans that are bad on film. They make themselves look bad. Um, what are we going to do about it? And somebody, I wouldn't be surprised if it was Roger Stone, because Roger Stone was actually working on this Free Our Internet campaign, um, came up with the idea of accuse him of assaulting Christie. So that's what they did. And I didn't think much of it. We didn't use the video because it just wasn't that useful. I saved it in case it ever became useful, but he didn't answer any questions about Me Too. So, I just kind of let it go. And a couple of weeks later, I'm covering the Hill, and there's a Hill hearing where Ryan Zinke, former Secretary of the Interior, is testifying on his budget to the Senate. And our opposition research showed that he'd spent $30,000 on a pair of doors, and he had flown, spent several $1,000s taking 3 helicopters with some cronies of his flying around the Bears Ear monuments and like Army Apache helicopters. And it just seemed excessive to us. And we wanted to hold him accountable for that. So I was sent there to ask questions about that. Essentially what I said was, how do you still have your job after wasting so much money on these stores and on these helicopter things? And his staff just went crazy. His staff, you know, made a big commotion such that a Capitol Hill policeman, walked up to me, put his hand in my chest, pushed me back. No, I wasn't touching anyone. I was just asking questions while they got on the elevator. And they got on the elevator and left. And, I was kind of annoyed with the Capitol policeman because freedom of the press, right? I'm not touching anybody. I'm not impeding anyone's progress. I'm following all the rules. I'm simply articulating questions here. I'm asking questions out loud, and they don't like the questions, and it's un-American.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to Truth Frequency Radio. And I am here having a compelling interview with the journalist and lawyer Mike Stark. And boy, he's telling me a story that I believe happens. I hear about it all the time, but I want to get back to you so you can continue on with your story. Sorry I missed the clock. I was just engrossed in what you were telling me. But we're back now.
Oh, that's fine. Where I left off was Senate hearing, and essentially the reason I told you about that is because now I'm on their map. Now Ryan Zinke and his staff, his posse, they know exactly who I am because there was a House hearing 2 days later. I didn't get to ask my question then because the policeman interfered, and I didn't get any kind of answer. So I went to the House hearing, and this time I actually went to the House hearing. At the conclusion of his testimony, it's kind of ironic because I felt like he answered the two questions that I had about the helicopters and the doors fairly well. He said that the doors had actually been ordered by the Obama administration, and that it's typical when you're managing all the federal and national parks that you've got to get there somehow. And Sally Jewell would take, when she was Secretary of the Interior, to go hiking would take a helicopter into Yellowstone. Otherwise, you're spending, several days getting to where you want to go sometimes. And as Secretary of the Interior, you don't have that kind of time. So I thought he answered those questions pretty well. And at the conclusion of his hearing, I walked around to the table and I said, "Look, Secretary, I met you 2 days ago, and I want to apologize because I think my questions were probably unfounded. But I've got additional questions for you." And his press secretary, her name was Heather Swift, got him into it and says, "Who are you with?" I said, "American Bridge." "Oh, well, that's not real media." And I'm not sure if you've ever been to a hearing room in the Capitol, but this one was pretty small, and you had a narrow column between the way the chairs were arranged to walk through to exit this room. And as I'm walking through that column stepwise, the way one does when you're in a crowd moving through a small space, I have to turn left to go out the public doors while the secretary goes straight to go into the committee space. And as I make my left turn, Heather Swift takes a sharp step to her left, throws her hip into me, and then looks up at me and says, "Hey, stop pushing." I look back at her. I say, "You cannot push me." And I continue my way out into the hallway where I'm detained by police. Now, the good thing here is that I had been recording everything with my GoPro camera. That did not stop me from going to jail. I begged the police to look at the GoPro camera. I explained to the police that I work for a partisan news organization, that these Republicans hate being held accountable, and that this is a political hit. And if they would just look at my video, they would see that she and all the Republican witnesses in that room were telling outrageous lies about what happened. The police refused to look at the video. As far as the police were concerned, we've got 5 witnesses saying that you assaulted her. We'll let it all be sorted out by the judge. The worst thing Heather Swift did is when I could have been ticketed and allowed to go home. Heather Swift asked for me to be sent to jail so I would have to see the judge the next day so she could get a stay away order because he was afraid of me. She told the police that. That's in the police documents. So I ended up going to jail for the second time. I got out of jail the next day, and let me tell you, the DC jail is not a pleasant place to be.
That was my question. I wanted to hear detail about that. So, because I know we had talked off air, and you had told me just how bad it really was.
Yeah, well, we had talked off air about, the Las Vegas jail. The DC jail was just as bad. I had one cellmate put the guy in the cell across from me. You don't want to know what he was doing to himself. There was another guy in a cell that, got violated because he was doing the same kind of thing, only he did it in front of a female guard. This is one night in jail. And there's, two incidents that are, look, jail right now, I believe, is a place we lock up people with mental health issues.
Mhm.
We lock them up instead of getting them any kind of treatment. And I'm not going to say everybody I was in jail with had mental health issues. Some of the folks probably deserve to be there for whatever reason. The guy that was in my cell was in jail for stealing a box of Pop-Tarts. He was accused of stealing a box of Pop-Tarts. He told me he walked into the store with them. But, it's just, the other thing I'll tell you about jail is everybody's black. When I was in the Fairfax County Jail, the first time I went to jail after the Ed Gillespie incident, I was dumbfounded. I couldn't believe it. Fairfax is a pretty wealthy white area. There's some diversity.
So there is diversity. Okay.
There is some diversity, but most of the diversity in Fairfax consists of Asian people, Persian people, Asian both from India and China. There aren't a lot of black people in Fairfax. When I was in jail, I was the only white person. There was one Latino person and there were 13 black people. I couldn't believe it. I knew there was a disparity in the way we police in America. That just knocked me on my rear end. I couldn't believe I was the only white person in jail. I mean, don't white people at least get DWIs or something?
Right.
It's anecdotal, and it's a single day in jail, but it was still pretty remarkable for me. And the DC jail was the same way. The DC jail was dirtier than the Fairfax jail. You shared your room with another person and a whole bunch of cockroaches. It's just, the place is infested, and it's no human should be treated the way we treat prisoners at this DC jail. Anyway, of course, I finally get to court. We play the video, and the judge, says, "Look, I find you credible. She's not credible. You're not guilty." And I walk. The problem with all these things, and the same thing happened in Fairfax, by the way. I went to the first trial, and I actually had a judge who had been a former prosecutor and a former reporter, and he didn't like my style of reporting. He didn't think for some reason, he thought all reporters needed to be fair and balanced, and we didn't do a good enough job pointing out that there's the Nation and there's the Weekly Standard and there is partisan media. So I think he took affront to the way I was reporting, and he found me guilty at the district court level. We appealed to the circuit court level, and the case was dismissed before trial. So I've not been found guilty of anything because I haven't been guilty of anything.
And you had video footage to prove it.
And I had video footage to prove it in each case. Mm-hmm. It's funny because I was actually arrested for swearing at the cops. I forgot to tell you that. I was cursing at police was the charge in Fairfax after the policeman had cursed at me first. Anyway, the bottom line is I've not been found guilty of anything yet because I haven't been guilty of anything. But that doesn't stop you from having to spend. I spent $7,000 in Fairfax, and my bill for the Washington, D.C. arrest was $13,000. So now we're up to $20,000, and I still haven't got to my third arrest, which occurred last October out in Las Vegas. Adam Laxalt was running for governor. He was the sitting attorney general. And I asked him, I was there to ask him about sealed arrest records from his time as a college student. Somehow our group found out that one of the things that he had been arrested for was assaulting a police officer. So the specific question I was sent out there to ask was, aside from the police officer, have you assaulted anybody else? Have you been arrested for assaulting anyone else? The minute he saw me with my camera, he bugged out, and his campaign bugged out. They turned on their heel. They went into another room, and I followed him into the other room. Started to ask my question. He ran back the way he had come. I had to chase after him. And again, I just put this video up at dailykos.com. I think the name of the diary was something like, what happened in Vegas is scary, but it can't stay there. If anybody wants to go look at this video. I continued following him. I did everything the way a reporter's supposed to do. He's got a body man. with him. He's probably his driver, but also a guy who goes and fetches water and, in a pinch might need to protect him or something like that. As I approached him, I made sure his body man was between me and him. But I was still asking these questions. And, they just didn't want to face questions. It's a phenomenon. It happens late in campaign season. This was late October, October 16th. We've got 3 weeks to go before the election. At this point, every news cycle is worth probably millions of dollars to a campaign. You've got to win the news cycle. And losing a news cycle costs you millions of dollars. A clear video of you being asked about your arrest record and you behaving badly or not answering the question could cost you a news cycle. If it goes viral on the internet, it's going to be covered locally and all the rest. So they definitely don't want to take these questions. And the closer you get to the end of the campaign, people are losing sleep. The stakes are just that much higher. So they're extremely fearful of this question. And it shows because they try to escape into a room. Well, I've been invited to this event. It's at the East Las Vegas Community Center. It's a public building. I've got every bit as much right to go in any of those public spaces as they do, so I try to follow him. And his campaign staff, essentially attacks me. His campaign manager throws her arm up underneath my chin and armpit. She's got a guy named Ryan Keller, who was the deputy director of Donald Trump's campaign in Iowa there, helping out with the campaign. He kind of uses the campaign manager and this small girl named Kristen Davison as a battering ram, corrals her, hugs her from beyond, and crushes her into me up against the door jamb. And then a couple of other guys. And this is what's crazy about all of this, especially during campaign season. People you think have had extraordinary lives lose their damn minds. Bob List was the former governor of Nevada. He enters the room. He starts grabbing at my arm and pulling me in every which direction. He's got no right to touch me. It's an assault. He's a lawyer. Folks know that unwanted touching is an assault. His law partner, Joe Brown, has been a commissioner of the Athletic Gaming Commission, which is huge in Nevada. Commissioner of the Gaming Commission, again, huge in Nevada. This guy is, in life, just got an extraordinary record of achievement. This guy's pulling at my hair, pulling on my ear, pulling at my cheek. And you look at his face in the video, and he's lost his damn mind. I can't say that enough. For whatever reason, politics has degenerated in America so much, especially on the right. And you see it at the Donald Trump campaign rallies, and to a lesser extent, in this event, to a greater extent, you see it at lesser Republican campaign rallies. Republicans despise the media, and the only thing they despise more than the media is Democratic partisan media. And that's what I was. So I got attacked. Of course, the same dynamic plays out again. You're the only Democrat at this event. You're the skunk at the picnic. And you've got 8 Republicans that coordinate their story, all tell the same story. It in no way matches up with the video we have. But the policeman doesn't care. The policeman's there to do a job. Look, I got 8 people saying that, and she's showing me marks on her arms where you grabbed her. I didn't grab her. Ryan Keller grabbed her. And we have that on video. I go to jail. I end up going to the Las Vegas County Jail. And here's the other thing. It happened in both D.C. and in Las Vegas. While you're in jail, Republicans take advantage of that opportunity to win a news cycle. The putative victims, the fake victims, run to the media and say, out of control Democrat attacks another female campaign staffer. All I have is the video, but I don't have the video because I'm in jail. And by the time you get out of jail 2 days later or a day and a half later, and you've got time to talk to the media doesn't care anymore because the story has passed. So they use the news of your arrest and pictures that they took while you were being handcuffed to send off to Fox News and to send off to the Daily Caller and all the right-wing media. It makes it into the Washington Post. You can't rebut anything they're saying because you're in jail and you don't have any access to any of these reporters. So a certain story gets told. After my third arrest, the firm I worked for, American Bridge, said, look, we can't continue to be smeared in the media. This one here could have cost us an election. Just as the news cycle is important to the Republicans, it's important to the Democrat too. And the Democrats lost that news cycle because what I should have done is when things really got hairy, I should have withdrawn instead of continuing to be a reporter and try to get the story. I should have just walked away. Um, Heat of the moment, though, you're there to do a job. You've traveled across the country to do this job. Doing my job was important to me. I should have probably used better judgment because, to be honest with you, it cost the Democrat that election cycle. And if we had lost that election because of me, I would have been beside myself, even though I didn't do anything wrong. If I had allowed myself to be set up and we had lost that election, fortunately, we won the election. We won the Senate election. We had a pretty clean sweep in Nevada. But look, the point of all this is that I'm a reporter. I'm out asking accountability questions of Republicans. And because of that, I've gone to jail 3 times. And now with the, Las Vegas legal fees, and that case is still playing out, I'm up to $25,000 in lawyer costs so far. It's not something that should be happening in the United States.
No, it absolutely shouldn't. And, I was talking about different journalists and reporters that have been in similar situations, and they wanted sources, and some of them went to jail because they wouldn't give them up. And so I don't know. When do you think journalism, in your opinion, this is kind of a general question, when do you think journalism got so ugly? It just seems to have taken a real downturn. And I don't know if it was when Donald Trump took office. I don't remember exactly when I saw such a turn, though. So I'm going to get your opinion on that.
So if I had to guess, I would say it's been a progression. Donald Trump didn't get into office out of a vacuum. There was a lot of groundwork that was laid before he ran for office. The rise of right-wing talk radio, the ability of Breitbart and Daily Caller and email lists, people to silo into their conservative news community. I mean, you've heard of QAnon and Alex Jones and all these folks. We've got probably a third of the people that pay attention to politics in America in a hardcore way, believing almost exclusively lies. And if I had to track it back, I'd say it was probably when Reagan obliterated the fairness doctrine. And all of a sudden you had Rush Limbaugh and the rest of talk radio, just rising very quickly. There was another big step, I think, taken with the maturation of the internet and folks being able to, and all these crazy emails your uncle gets and forwards to you. You know what I mean? Some of these things are just nuts, but there's
a lot of hidden truths also. At the same time, you just have to be discerning. You have to know where to look and go to the right sources. But there's a lot of things that don't get covered on mainstream media. As you know, you have a blog, so.
Right. And well, there's things that don't get covered that are verifiable and plausible. And there's things that don't get covered that, so I think a classic example is probably the birtherism, right? The mainstream media didn't cover birtherism because there was a birth announcement for Barack Obama in the Hawaiian newspaper in 1961 or whatever year it was he was born, or 57 or whatever it was. That story was fever swamps from the beginning. And the mainstream media wasn't going to cover it because it was fever swamps. It took off in right-wing media. It just blew up. And, to this day, if you ask your run-of-the-mill Republican whether or not he thinks Barack Obama was born in the United States, they'll tell you he was born in Mombasa, Kenya.
I've heard that.
I
Yeah, I
don't
have
know.
Republicans, I have Republicans, I have Democrats, I have everything in between on the show. So yeah, I've heard things like that. I have.
Yeah, well, I'm not making any secret. I'm definitely a partisan, and I definitely look down my nose at otherwise intelligent people who align themselves with the Republican Party and believe some of these outrageous things that the Republicans sell them. Um, I I can't be any other way.
You have to be
I'm,
true to
I'm
yourself, and
hardwired
that's
as a
understandable.
partisan. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So, but regardless of whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat, the idea that we're putting reporters in jail uh,
Yes,
on
agreed.
trumped up, no pun intended, on trumped up charges, and there's no recourse for me. Look, I filed a lawsuit now because I do believe that, a year ago, nobody had ever accused me in my life of assaulting a woman. Within a year, three different women falsely accused me of assaulting them. I don't think that's an accident. I think that
No,
is something that is coordinated on email
set up.
list amongst
Hmm.
Republican communications professionals as a means of marginalizing an effective Democratic reporter. So I've launched a lawsuit against all the different players, including the Republican Governors Association, the NRCC, the NRSC, the RNC, all the different folks that I believe could have had a hand in strategizing about how to marginalize me. But this lawsuit's going to be incredibly difficult to prosecute. And again, that lawsuit, my lawyer tells me I have to raise $70,000 to pay for that lawsuit. So next week I'll be launching a GoFundMe, and we'll try to do this. But
How can people get to it? Is it going to be
that's
on your site, on your blog?
uh, we will have an announcement next week. But right now I think it's Resistance Media. GoFundMe/resist. You know what? I can't remember what the URL is because it's not ready to be launched yet. I essentially tell this story and I give you some background about some of my other activism and stuff like that on the GoFundMe page. Um, but I don't go into as much detail about the three arrests just because you saw how long it took me to tell you the story here. I don't want people's
Right.
eyes glazing over. Um, but I'm sorry I can't give that to you right now. It's just not ready for launching. But
Okay.
if your audience is paying attention to Twitter and if they go to Daily Kos, they'll see something next week.
Okay. Yeah, this is the Constitution seems to be shredded. It seems shredded, and I see it being shredded before my eyes, I should say. It's just we live in scary times.
You don't know what tomorrow's going to bring.
No, you don't.
And it's funny, as partisan as I am as a Democrat, I have so much criticism for Democrats. After yesterday's Mueller report comes out and we hear all of these different attempts at obstruction, and it's funny, I don't know how they could say there was no collusion when there were so many attempts to collude and there were so many coordinated activities. They said, Donald Trump knew WikiLeaks had Hillary's emails before WikiLeaks released them, and they worked to coordinate their message for when they were released. I don't understand how that's not collusion, right? And I don't understand how elected Democrats don't see that as collusion. And what I really don't understand is how Democrats are so mealy mouthed and weak when it comes to doing their jobs, which is at this point opening up impeachment inquiries. If you don't do this in 2020, when Donald Trump loses, does anyone have any doubt he's going to do something to claim that he was cheated and that he's the rightful victor and try to hold on to power? Him holding on to power is the only thing keeping him and his family out of jail right now. I
Yeah.
definitely look. We don't know what's coming around tomorrow, but I do know that today Democrats should be doing their job, and they're
Mhm.
just complete abdication of responsibility. They've got a constitutional function, and that constitutional function today is to open up an impeachment inquiry. I don't understand why they're not.
Mhm. And journalists need to be protected. I don't care who's in charge of that. Someone has got to make sure that there are protection laws. Yeah, because this kind of thing can't happen. And you had videos, and it already hit the press. But of course, we all know it's hard to print a retraction, or getting that retracted is very difficult, and it's still online. So yeah, it's sticky.
I did get one retraction from the Montana Billings Gazette. I was happy to get that, and hopefully I'll have some success getting some others. But it's funny because I'm able to tell you my story from a partisan politics
We just
kind
have
of.
a minute left. Yeah.
Have you seen what's happening to animal rights activists and
Oh
folks
yeah.
some of the
Oh
laws that have
yeah.
been passed to keep them from
Very.
jobs?
Mhm.
We're going in the opposite direction. We're not protecting journalists. We're making it unlawful for journalists to do their jobs in some
We
cases.
we got to get
So
that
there's a lot of work.
stopped. Yeah, I hope you come back sometime. I've really enjoyed speaking with you on and off air. And I just want to remind everybody that I have a new YouTube channel, and it's called A Good Place with Ella. This one should be up by tomorrow. Just check it out. There's all these great stories, and they really do have integrity. And I feel like you're one of those people as well. We're out, so I hope to see you next week. Thank you, Mike.